Good evening and welcome everybody. I want to welcome new folks here. So I will ask the patience of everybody else so I can give a brief introduction in terms of where you find yourself and what we're looking to accomplish here. Okay, so we are exploring the book Chovot HaLevavot by Ibn Pakuda. It was written in the 1100s, in the 1000s, about 100 years before the Rambam. And he wrote this book to fill a need he had. The need he had was he wanted to have a better relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. He looked at the mitzvot in the Torah and he divided them into two. He divided them of mitzvot of doing, things like sukkah and lulav, right? And things of feeling that we call the emotional mitzvot. Loving God, worshiping God, having trust in God, all of those things, and he looked for a book, and he could not find it. So he wrote it. And he wrote the book so that we can find a path. He actually wrote a book so he can find a path to fulfilling those mitzvot. How do we do it? And he wrote this sefer in 10 sections. Each one is called a gate. And each gate, it's very appropriate, leads to the next one. We tonight are actually going to be starting the third gate, the gate that's called Avodat HaElohim. And I'll give an introduction to that, which will cover what we covered in the first two gates very quickly, which will bring you exactly up to speed. But before we start, I want to go back and remind everybody that we dedicate the learning that we do, and we hope that the learning goes to the zchut of those who are sitting in Hamas terror dungeons. May our families be returned to us, our men and women, boys and girls and babies, soon and unharmed. We are learning in the zchut of the cholim and the pitzuim, those of our soldiers who have been wounded on the battlefield. We daven for the safety of our chayalim. May they come home victorious and in one piece to their families soon. And we are davening for, or learning in the zchut of a complete and swift and total victory over the modern day Amalek. In fact, for the first time I saw, somebody had put on their car, it was actually it was professionally done, it said, Macho emche et zecher Amalek. Completely wipe out the memory of Amalek, which is something that I have been thinking about these past few months.
Amen.
So we have, up till now, finished two gates. And the question becomes, so what? Right? What does this gate get us? And here's the progression that we had so far. We just said that each gate leads to the next one, and the one before it is foundational. So the first gate was called Shaar HaYichud, the unity of God. Then we said Shaar HaBechina, and both of those gates established for us three basic obligations. One is we have an obligation to know whatever we can know about God, which isn't much, right, in terms of him in his reality. The other is that we have an obligation and a responsibility to recognize him and to acknowledge him and to look for him everywhere in our universe, in our day-to-day lives, in ourselves, in the nature. And we spoke about some of the different ways that we should do that. Did anybody have a chance this week to kind of take a moment and look around and see the Kadosh Baruch Hu in their world? That was the workbook task so far. And the other piece that we are obligated to do is not just to see him, but to understand all of the chesed and all of the benefits that we get from everything he has created. And we talked about the benefit of both light and darkness. We talked about the benefits of our bodies and the benefits of our mind, right? All of that he created for us. So these three obligations are foundational really for the rest of the Sefer and really critical for us to continue on in our task at hand. And that will, in the end, because the last Shaar, I know this is a spoiler, is called Shaar Ahavat Hashem, the gate of loving God. All of that will lead us to that, and will at that point help us to understand and to begin to fulfill what we are calling for this course the emotional mitzvot, right? And to create a closer relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So as I said, the next gate is called Shaar Avodat HaElohim, which means the gate of serving God. And we're going to spend a good deal of time on this topic. And it is, in short, our obligation to do what the Kadosh Baruch Hu has asked us to do. But before we determine what this service entails, Ibn Pekuda asks a very simple question, which is why? Why is it that we would be obligated to serve God? It's an interesting question we don't spend a lot of time on. What he says in the first source, he says, having in previous treatises, that's a translation that they use for the gate, expounded the obligation of wholeheartedly acknowledging the unity of God and the obligation of examining the various modes of his benefits to mankind, we have next to indicate what a human being's conduct should be once the foregoing has become clear to him. And that is to assume the obligation of service of God as reason would require from a beneficiary to a benefactor. Now, we decided early on that we're going to just read the translation in English. He wrote it in Arabic. We can certainly read it in the original, which won't help anybody, except for Ayala and maybe me. So one translation is as good as another. So that's why when we're going to read it, we're just going to concentrate on the English. So last time, we brought up an image of a terrarium, right? That we're just inside the terrarium, the Kodesh Baruch Hu is outside. So using that image, why can't I just live in my terrarium the way I want to? How does my knowing that somewhere out there is a God who is beneficent to me, and who does good things to me, how does that obligate me to do anything for him? The truth is, it's not like I asked him to do anything for me. So I can understand saying, okay, if I want to, but what exactly is this obligation? So the Chovot HaLevavot answers this question with one word in English, two words in Hebrew. In English, it's called gratitude. In Hebrew, it's called hakarat hatov. Right? According to Rabbeinu Bachya, this sense of gratitude is what should drive our desire to love and to serve God. He writes, source 2, we assert as a truth, we being mankind in general, as a truth generally recognized that if anyone benefits us, we are under an obligation of gratitude to him in accordance with his intent to help us. Even if he actually falls short, owing to some mishap which prevents him from his benefiting us, we are still bound to be grateful to him, since we are convinced that he has a benevolent disposition towards us, meaning he likes us, and his intention is to be a benefit to us. In other words, an act of kindness where we benefit creates an obligation of gratitude to the one who helped us. We take this as a given. That's obvious, right? Somebody opens the door for you, you go through and you say, thank you, right? And you say thank you because you're acknowledging that he or she did something nice to you. And sometimes the obligation is greater, but at a minimum, we need to acknowledge this act. And what is owed in this area is proportional to the act. So the greater the benefit we receive, the more, and we even use this expression in English, the more the debt of gratitude is. I mean, it's an interesting expression, right? That it means that we have a debt that we need to repay because somebody has been kind to us. And Ibn Pekuda says that even if he wasn't able to deliver on the goods and it didn't pan out, the fact that his heart was in the right place and the fact that his intention was to do good for us, we still have an obligation to him. So how far does this obligation go? He says it only goes as far as when our benefactor had us in mind when he did us the kindness. He says, source 3, on the other hand, should we obtain any benefit through one who had no such intention, the duties of gratitude to that person would cease, and we are under no obligation. Now, this is just a point that he makes, but I want to take a side trip because this last sentence makes no sense, right? Because it's simply not true. Since Tu B'Shvat is coming up, and Rosh Chodesh is Thursday, right? So in about 2.5 weeks. So I want to use a Tu B'Shvat example. And let's take the very famous story of Choni Megagel, right? And the carob tree, right? So the Gemara in Masechet Tanit says, Yom Achada Hava Azel Bo'orcha. Right? One day he was walking along the road. Lehu Gavra Dahave Nata Charuva. He saw an individual who was planting a carob tree. Amarle, he said, Hai ad kama shinin ta'in. Right? He said to him, how many years before this tree is going to bear fruit? And he said, 7 years. Ad shivin shanin, right? Until 70 years. Amarle, pshitalach de chayet shivin shanin. Do you really think you're going to live another 70 years? Amarle hai gavra. This person said, and this is a famous expression, he said, when I came into this world, there were carob trees, and I have an obligation to plant carob trees for the future. Well, this is a man who had an obligation to do something in return for somebody who did not have him in mind, right? Somebody 70 years ago had planted carob trees. Now he feels he has to return that favor, and not only to the person who did that kindness, but to do a kindness to somebody else. So that would seem to say that Ibn Pekuda's idea is not necessarily so. So giving him the benefit of the doubt, and by the way, this story obligates us to have hakarat hatov to the gardeners in Netanya who do such a wonderful job pruning the trees, or the people who sweep the streets, who do a wonderful job of picking up the litter and things. Even though they don't have us in mind, we still have this obligation. That and more is that the Gemara says that we have an obligation to inanimate objects, even things that can't have any intention at all. Right? And in this week's Parsha, Vayera, is kind of the poster child example of that. The first plague was conducted by Aaron. The reason being is it entailed hitting the Nile. Moshe did not want to hit the Nile because he had hakarat hatov. He benefited from the Nile saving it or protecting it when he was in the teva, in the little basket, and so he wouldn't do that. There's another Gemara in Masechet Baba Kama that gives a common adage of the time. Right? And the common adage of the time means that this was already integrated into our culture in the way we looked at it. And it says, Rabba said to Rabba Bar Mari, where do we derive this matter? We're not going to go to where it's derived from. By where the people say, if there is a well that you drank from, do not throw a stone into it. Because if you benefited from it, you should have hakarat hatov. So I then go back to Ibn Pekuda and say, what is Ibn Pekuda talking about? And I'll give you one more example, is that even if the person who does you a kindness had as his intention to hurt you, the fact that you benefited, you still owe him a debt of gratitude. So Breshit Rabbah, the Midrash there, asks the question about why Og Melech HaBashan lived 400 years. He lived in the time of Avram Avinu, and he was eventually killed by Moshe Rabbeinu. So why did the Kadosh Baruch Hu give him the benefit of living such a long life? So the Midrash tells us that it has to do with the story with Lot. That when Lot was captured, the one who came and told Avram Avinu that Lot was captured was Og Melech Bashan. Now you sit there and you say, okay, that sounds like a nice thing to do. And on one level, I guess it is. But what Og Melech HaBashan wanted to do is he wanted to have Abraham killed on the field of battle, and he could marry Sarah. But even that was not enough to say that we don't owe them a debt of gratitude and a thank you and an obligation. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu rewards him. He also punishes him, but that's part of the Midrash I don't need to go into right now. So what is he talking about? And the reason I'm dwelling on this is because the basis of his entire, Ibn Pekuda, the Chovot HaLevavot's philosophy of our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is based on our obligation to have gratitude towards him. Okay, we're going to run across this theme again and again and again and again. So the only case that I could think of is when something looks to be a benefit, but it really wasn't a benefit. So the example that I thought about, we find in Masechet Avodah Zarah at the beginning of the Gemara. So the nations of the world in the time of Mashiach are telling the Kadosh Baruch Hu that they really were very good to the Jews. And they did everything they could to help us. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and what they say is, the Gemara turned, Holy One, blessed be He, said, what did you occupy yourself with, right? How did you spend your life? This, he's talking to nations. And they say, Ribono shel ha'olam, Master of the universe, we have established many marketplaces, we have built many bathhouses, we have increased much silver and gold, and we did all of this for the Jewish people, right? Can you imagine? Mm-hmm. We did all of this so they would be free to engage in Torah. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu said, wait a minute, fools of the world. Mm-hmm. You know, I might have been born at night, but I wasn't born last night. Everything you did for your own needs. You established marketplaces to place prostitutes in them. You built bathhouses for your own enjoyment. And as for silver and gold that you claim to have increased, it is mine, as it is stated, mine is silver, and mine is gold, said Hashem Tzivakot. Right? So that's a case where it looks like it was a benefit to us, but there was no intention behind it. But if somebody does us a benefit, whether they intended it for us or not, as long as it was really a benefit, we have an obligation of hakarat hatov. I'm looking out, and I am seeing that you're saying to yourself, why are we detouring off of the service of God? And it's because the next thing that the Chovot HaLevavot is going to do, and he's going to do this throughout the Sefer, he's going to look at our world and our interactions with each other and get us to learn from that how we should interact with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We did that for the last 3 weeks, looking at our world and seeing if we can identify and acknowledge and see the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And now he's going to see in terms of hakarat hatov. The Chovot HaLevavot says that in our world, in the world of man, everybody acts out of self-interest. If you ask him, he said there really isn't pure altruism in the world. And this is not just a Jewish thing. It's not just a new thing. So I brought two quotes. One from Francois de la Rochefoucauld, who was a 17th century French moralist. His quote, he obviously said it in French, I'm going to say it in English. "We would frequently be ashamed of our good deeds if people saw all of the motives that produced them." And my favorite quote is actually from Oscar Wilde, the Irish playwright, who said, "The nicest feeling in the world is to do a good deed anonymously and have somebody find out." Because the motivation in many cases is we want people to know that we're good people. We want people to know that we do chesed. And so none of our actions are 100% altruistic. And so according to Ibn Battuta, altruism, pure altruism, really doesn't exist. And he brings 5 examples of giving relationships where he points out that the motivations are really self-interests. And even though they are self-interested, we still have both an instinctive feeling and a Torah obligation to have hakarat hatov for them. So here are the ones that he brings. He brings a parent to his child, a master to his servant. If we were going to update the language, it would be an employer to his employee, a wealthy individual, a gvir, who gives tzedakah to the poor, people who do kindness for other people, somebody who's a gomel chesed, and a powerful person who helps the weak. Now, the Chovot HaLevavot goes through each one of these categories and points out where the self-interest lies. But the most surprising on this list to me is the parent to the child, because you would think that that would be the most altruistic of the relationship. And he says the following. This is source 8. "A father's beneficence to his child is obviously that the father's motive is to further his own interest, his being the father's interest. For the child is part of the father, whose chief hopes is centered on his offspring. Do you not observe that in regard to its food, drink, clothing, and warding off all hurt from it, a father is more sensitive about his child than about himself? To secure ease for it, the burden of toil and weariness is lightly borne upon him, the feeling of tenderness and pity for their offspring being nothing unnaturally implanted in the parents." In other words, that we see our children as extensions of ourselves, and by helping the children, we're helping ourselves. And we help our children because not only do they represent us in our personal hopes, but they're our future, they're part of us. All right, the bottom line is we benefit from other people's obligations, and it creates a debt for us. This is the basis for our relationship with other people. Now, I'll tell you this as well, that I want to point out, is he says that all of the relationships that he points out seem to be an imbalance in power, right, between a powerful and a not powerful. Parent-child, rich-poor, powerful, not powerful, somebody in a position to do chesed, somebody in a position to receive chesed. And the Chovot HaLevavot says, no, that's not true. He said, the differences that people have between them are minor. He says that basically we're all the same. Let me read what he says. He said, "We should further come to understand that any human being who renders a kindness to another in any of the modes of above specified is not superior to the person whom he benefits, except in some incidental detail, while in their humanity and essence they are alike and akin to one another in substance and form, in physical construct and figure or mentality, in their natures and the larger part of what happens to them. Nevertheless, the beneficiary, as we have set forth, is under an obligation of service to the benefactor. In other words, when we have an obligation of hakarat hatov to somebody, and you say, well, we have a hakarat hatov to them because they're more powerful than me, the answer is they're not more powerful than you. Except for some minor things like maybe strength and money, they're just like you. Now, he's obviously setting us up for our discussion of this is how we behave towards man. Let's see how we behave for God, because God obviously is the only one who can practice true altruism, because God doesn't need anything. There's nothing that we can do that will be a benefit to him. If we are willing to have this feeling of awe and fear for somebody who is our peer, how much more so somebody who is indescribably greater and more powerful than us. Right? Now, I want to point to another theme that we're going to see throughout the Sefer. And that is that the behaviors that we need to exhibit are behaviors we're already practicing. We already have gratitude towards people. We practice it more or less. We already have this feeling of obligation. We already do that. So we know how to do it. So he's not going to teach us anything new. He's just going to teach us where to direct it and maybe some details around it. In fact, he says, if I look at source 10, if this is true, and I think it's true, I mean, I didn't see anybody stand up and say, no, I don't think gratitude's a good thing, or we don't owe gratitude to people around us. So he says, if this is true, how much more then does a human being owe service, praise, and gratitude to him who created the benefit and the benefactor, whose beneficence is unlimited, permanent, perpetual, without any motive of self-interest or purpose of warding off injury, but only an expression of grace and loving kindness emanating from him towards all human beings. Should anyone, and here he pulls no punches, should anyone be so foolish as to contest this obligation of a human being towards the Creator, when he examines and closely studies the subject and acknowledges the truth to himself, the sleeper will surely awake. The negligent will be aroused, the ignorant will investigate, the intelligent will understand, the demonstration of obligatory character of the service of God through the clear proofs, well-known testimonies, and true signs, as the prophet, peace upon him, said, now this is prophet, peace upon him is Moshe Rabbeinu, said concerning one who neglects to reflect upon the obligation of the service of God, do you thus repay the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Is not he your father? Has he acquired you? Has he not made you and established you? Now, he has an interesting word. I don't know if you caught it. He says here, the sleeper will surely awake. He compares us to sleepers, and we need something to wake us up. We need something that he calls hitorut. Hitorut is an awakening. We have that word in the Lachadodi, right? Hitorari, from the prophet Yeshaya. Now, it's not 100% clear what form or content that this hitorut needs to take. It's not clear to me whether it needs to be a spiritual epiphany or it's just a reminder for us to remind ourselves or for somebody outside to remind ourselves. It's not important for right now, and we'll get to it. So the Chovot HaLevavot asks the question, why would we need a reminder? We spent the last really 7 weeks, going through, talking about everything that God does for us. And there was nothing, I didn't see anybody here grab their heart and say, oh my God, I didn't know this, this is a revelation. It was all things that we knew. So he said, why is it that we need to be woken up? Why do we need this hit'ororut? Why isn't it just innate in us to be able to feel this gratitude towards the Kodesh Baruch Hu? So we have been beneficiaries of this chesed really all our lives, and really even before that. But we look at it, air is just air. Air has always been there, and it will always be there. And we don't pay much attention to it, and we don't look at it as a gift, and we don't look at it as beneficent. It's just there. And by the time we become cognizant that we should be looking behind the rock, or behind the air, and who gives it and who put it there, etc., we're already hard-coded to just accept these things as given. So the way I think about it is, do fish feel water? I mean, fish are surrounded by water. They need the water to exist. And the one that, do they feel it, or do they just accept that it's there? So we need to be reminded and reinforced to give service to the Kodesh Baruch Hu in appreciation for everything he does for us. So what form should this awakening come from? And he says that it needs to come from two places. It needs to come from here, but here is not enough. We need some external stimulus that will awaken us and I'm going to use the word compel us into this service of the Kodesh Baruch Hu out of gratitude. So the Chovot HaLevavot acknowledges this problem, and he lays it out as follows. He says man is a hybrid being, right? Meaning that we are created with a spirit, as a spiritual being that has been implanted into a physical being, right? And the fact that we are all spiritual, and the physical being longs for physicality and needs physical things for its nourishment, and as a spiritual being, we long to be close to the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and that's why you're all at this shiur, by the way. Right? So you have to keep that in mind. You're here because your neshamot demand you to be here. I mean, not just here, but looking out for a way to reach out to the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And we will call the spiritual side neshama, and we'll call this physical side guf. And while these two sides coexist, and in some way they support and protect and feed each other, they also struggle. There is an ongoing struggle in terms of who is going to control who. Will our spiritual nature rule over our physical nature, or vice versa? So Sefer Tehillim, there are two famous psukim in Sefer Tehillim that kind of describe our two halves. One is in Perek Chet, "V'tisachrehu mi'at me'Elohim u'kavod v'hadar ta'atrehu," and God made us a little lower than the angels, and thou dost crown him with glory and honor. And we also say in Mem Tet at the end, "Adam bikar v'lo yavin nimshal kivehema nidmu." Mortals do not understand honor. They are like beasts that perish. So it's hard to know what exactly we are. Are we spiritual? Are we physical? Sadia HaGaon says that this was obviously by design. Angels were made on the 5th day. Animals were made on the 6th day. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu put them both together at the end of creation, where we get torn in two directions at the same time. So now you're going to say, well, okay, if we're half angel and half beast, then why is it that I'm assuming that the beast side, the physical side, is going to win out over the spiritual side? Right? 50-50 means that it should be an equal tug of war. And what Ibn Pakuda says is the reason is that it's not a fair fight. Even if it's 50-50, it's not a fair fight. And Chovot HaLevavot said that if left alone, meaning with no external intervention, our physical side would win over our spiritual side almost every time. Now, to counter that and to make it a fair fight, the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us the external influence of Torah. Now, why is it, you're going to ask me, that it isn't a fair fight? Right? Why did the Kadosh Baruch Hu make it this way? Why would you assume that our ruchnius would win out over our gashmius?
We're set to fail.
What?
We're set up to fail. We're set up to fail.
We're set up to fail. We're set up to fail without the intervention of the Torah. So, point number one is that we as beings have a bias towards the physical over the spiritual. And I call that home court advantage. Right? Meaning, home court advantage is when you have two sports teams and one team is playing in their field that they play every day and the other one is visiting. So and there's an advantage to being at home. Our bodies are at home. We have been placed in a physical environment, right? And our bodies are very comfortable living in this physical environment. And as a result, they get more nourishment and more development, and we take advantage of our physical environment because there isn't an equivalent spiritual environment here. It is much, much weaker. So the Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us the Torah as a way to balance out the field and to overcome home court advantage. Anybody here play golf? Okay, so all right. I am a terrible golfer, but there's something called handicap. Yeah. Handicap are points that you give to the weaker player so that they can balance things out. So the Torah is our handicap, right? It gives our spiritual side the chizuk and the strength to be able to compete and to awaken us to meet our spiritual needs as well. To me, it's a wonderful image. Now, I will be honest, Ibn Pakuda didn't use home field advantage. I don't think he golfed. He didn't use handicap. But the point was the same. The second reason that our ruchnius, our neshama, is at a disadvantage is, as we said, this is a physical environment and he doesn't want to be here. And because he doesn't want to be here, he doesn't get benefit from being here. We get benefit from him being here, her being her, the neshama, but he doesn't get benefit from it. So he's weaker by nature. And he says this if you look at source 12. Secondly, the intellect, this is the neshama, is a spiritual entity originating in the higher spiritual world. It is a stranger in this world of gross material bodies. Sensual desires in man is the product of natural forces and a combination of his physical elements. The foundation is in this world, its roots in this abode. Food gives it strength, physical pleasures add to its vigor, while the intellect, the neshama, because it is a stranger here, stands without support or ally, and all are against it. Hence, it follows that it must become weak, and that it needs an external means to repel the mighty power of desire and overcome it. The third aspect has to do with the body works 24/7. The guf is always active in terms of growing, protecting, and sustaining itself. The neshama is awakened when we learn, when we daven, right? When we say Tehillim, all those times. And think about the proportion of the time that we dedicate to activities like that, and activities like eating or sleeping or running or exercise. I mean, they're important things, but the preponderance of our day, if you went and did a tick list of what you did for the last 15 minutes, my guess it would be more on this side than this side, right? And as a result, the neshama is at a disadvantage. And he says, third, the sensual desire constantly employed in feeding the body never ceases working by day or night. The neshama, on the other hand, is only called into activity to help one gratify his passions. Now, it is well known that physical faculties, which are constantly exercised in accordance with their nature, improve and become more efficient, while those that are less frequently used deteriorate and become inefficient. It logically follows, therefore, that the sensual desire, that's a physical desire, would become stronger because it is continually exercised, while the intellectual facility would weaken because it is used seldom, or seldom used, and so little for its proper use. So we have a situation where there needs to be two impetuses, one from inside to awaken us, but it is insufficient. We need something from the outside to awaken our neshama to the service of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that is the Torah. So far in this gate, we have established that the chesed that we receive from the Kadosh Baruch Hu obligates us to serve Him. And what we said that this should be obvious, but for reasons we just went over, as Isaac Asimov said, I was a big one on quotes this week. It is the obvious which is so difficult to see most of the time. Or everything that is obvious isn't apparent. So as a result, we need hitorarut, an awakening to this obligation that needs to come from within us and from outside. What we haven't discussed so far is what? What exactly is this obligation that we owe to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that we are calling in this gate, right, Avodat HaElohim? And the answer is, this is his quote, service is defined as a beneficiary submission, not sure what that means, to his benefactor. In this case, it is the service to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We express this service by doing what he has commanded us to do in return for, or really as a result of, all the favor and chesed we have received and continue to receive from him. And this idea is expressed in a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. You can use the word famous in front of every Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, so this is another famous Mishnah. It says, Hu haya omer, he used to say, Arsei ritzono keritzoncha, make his will like your will. In other words, adopt his will as your own. Do what he wants you to do. Kitei sheyatzer ritzoncha keritzono, so that you can make your will his. It says, batel ritzoncha, you should really nullify, set aside, it says here, your will, and only focus on him, so that everybody in the world can see and see that they are going to serve the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now there are two words here that the Chovot HaLevavot is going to spend entire gates on, and this is the aseh, which is do, which is the avodah, and then they say batel, which means to nullify. He is going to call it submission. And we're going to spend an entire gate trying to figure out what that means. But both of these things are part of this process of service of God. So, in keeping with our discussion up till now, the Chovot HaLevavot says there are two motivators. One is internal, one is external. We have different words for those. We know them in different terms. The first one is called yirah. It is called awe or fear, which is service to the Kadosh Baruch Hu out of fear, out of hope, necessity, compulsion. It's typically expressed that I will do what you want me to do either to receive a reward or out of fear of a punishment. This service is obligated to us through the Torah. The second motivation for service is based on our emotional attachment to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. There is something innate in us that wants us to serve God. It is a sense of duty, and it rises from the conviction that it is only right for us to worship, to exalt the Borei Olam, to whom we need to submit ourselves. We call this kind of service ahava, out of love. Now, both of these motivators are important, and the Chovot, HaLevavot says they are praiseworthy, and they lead to a Yeshua, to a salvation in the Olam Haba, right? So we need them both. That having been said, one of these leads to another, right? Because the next question you're going to ask me is, so where do we start? Do you start from Yira and it leads to Ava? Do you start from Ava? Where does this awakening come from? Which is which? And how do they work together? And my answer will be to you next time. That's where we'll start. So do you have any questions, comments? Sure.
It's kind of an overreaching question. In view of the fact that Hashem needs and wants nothing from us, what is our gratitude and service doing?
For him.
For him. It can't be doing anything for him. So what's the raison d'etre?
Okay. So did you hear? I'll hear the question. Right? Why does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want us to do anything? Right? What is it that he gets from our gratitude? I will do no better than to answer you the same way David HaMelech answered in the pasuk before the one I read, right in Parak 8. That goes, Hashem ma hadam v'tedaehu u'ben anosh v'techashvehu. What is man that you have any account of him, or the son of man that you're mindful of him? He had the same question. I didn't see any answer either. I don't know. Davin, and maybe he'll let you know. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.